Learners, welcome to my YouTube channel again. We are on equations and inequalities, and we are going to focus on quadratic equation. The name quadratic comes from quad, which means square. It is an equation where the highest exponent of the variable in the equation is a square. So please try your best to put the standard form of quadratic equation in your memory. The standard form for quadratic equation is ax to the power 2 plus bx plus c, which equals 0. Remember, we said that the highest exponent is square. So you can see the standard form, we have x to the power 2. Now in quadratic equation, the coefficient of x squared, which represents a, must not be equals to 0. In the standard form of quadratic equation, a, b, and c are known numbers, meaning we have those numbers. But the one that we are supposed to find is x. X is the one that we are looking for. That is the one that is unknown. Now let's take an example of a quadratic equation. This time we are going to solve quadratic equation by factorization. Now we have example 1. X to the power 2 plus 2x minus 3 is equals to 0. Notice that the example is in the form of quadratic. So now how do we solve? We are supposed to solve for x. Now to solve for x, the number -3, we have to find two numbers that when we multiply, we are going to have -3. And that same two numbers, when we add or subtract, we have to get the number in the middle of the example, that is 2. So the two numbers are 3 and -1, because 3 times 1, 3 times -1 will give us -3, and 3 plus or 3 minus 1 will give us 2. I repeat, to solve this quadratic equation, take the number -3. So you have to find two numbers that when you multiply, you are going to have -3. And that same two numbers, when you add or subtract, you have to get +2. That is the number in between. So therefore, what are the two numbers? The two numbers are 3 and -1. It is not 3 and 1, because 3 times 1 will not give us -3. So the two numbers are 3 and -1. 3 times -1 will give us -3, and 3 minus 1 will give us +2. The next is we have to substitute these two numbers into the equation. Look at the workings in red. So you can see 3x minus what? X. The two numbers are 3 and -1. The coefficients of the x is -1, and the coefficients of the other x is what? 3. So 3x minus x will give us 2x. Can you see? Good. So therefore, what then do we have to do? We look for the common number, that is the common factor, and the common factor for x squared plus 3x is what? X. So what must be in the bracket? X squared means x times x. Now we have taken 1x, what will be left? X. And here 3x, we have taken the x, so what will be left? 3. So we are going to have x in a bracket x plus 3, bracket close. Now whatever we get here, that is x plus 3, must also be the same as the other side, which is x minus 3. So we write x plus 3 at the other side, then we find the coefficient of negative x, and the coefficient of negative x is minus 1. So minus 1 times x will give us negative x, and minus 1 times positive 3 will give us minus 3. So now we take those outside the bracket, we put them together, and we select the common factor. So the one outside the bracket is what? X minus 3, and we take the common factor, and the common factor is x plus 3, also in a bracket. So now how do we solve for x? To get x, we take x plus 3 is equals to 0, or x minus 1 is equals to 0. So 3 will move to the right hand side. We are going to have x is equals to 0 minus 3. And 0 minus 3 is negative 3. So x is equals to negative 3. Or x minus 1 is equals to 0. Negative 1 will move to the right hand side so that the x can stand alone because we are looking for x. So x is equals to 0 plus 1. X is equals to 1. Example 2. Still in quadratic equation. We are also looking for x in equation. In example 2, we have x to the power 2 plus 3x is equals to 4. Let us always try to remember if the equation is not in a standard form, make sure you write it in a standard form. And remember, the standard form of a quadratic equation must be equals to what? 0. Hence, we must have x to the power 2 plus 3x minus 4 is equals to 0. Why minus? Because it is moving to the left hand side, and it was positive, so it must change to be negative. So therefore, the next step, we are going to have x plus 4 in a bracket, x minus 1 also in a bracket or parenthesis is equals to 0. Check how I got those two numbers in example 1, and you will be able to get the two numbers also in example 2. In a brief, we find two numbers that when we multiply, we are going to have negative 4. And that same two numbers, when we add or subtract, we are going to have positive 3. And the two numbers are 4 and negative 1. 4 times negative 1 will give us negative 4, and 4 minus 1 will give us the number 3. So now the next step, we take x plus 4 is equals to 0 to look for x. So we make x to stand alone. We are going to have x is equals to 0 minus 4, x is equals to negative 4. Or x minus 1 is equals to 0, x is equals to 0 plus 1, and 0 plus 1 is 1. So we are going to have x is equals to 1. Example 3. We have the square root of 2x plus 1 is equals to x minus 1. Now we want to do away with the square root. So to do away with the square root, you have to find the square of both sides, both the right hand side and the left hand side, to cancel the square root. So on the left hand side, we are going to have in a bracket square root of 2x plus 1 to the power 2. And the right hand side, we are going to have x minus 1 in a bracket to the power 2. So now we will be able to cancel the square root because we have squared both sides. So we will be left with 2x plus 1 is equals to x2 minus 2x plus 1. Now let's see how we can get x to the power 2 minus 2x plus 1. Please look at the workings there. X minus 1 in a bracket to the power 2 is the same as x minus 1 in a bracket multiplying x minus 1 also in a bracket. Now, to solve this, x on the left hand side, x is going to multiply what we have in the right side, which is x minus 1. Then after, we take negative 1 in the left side to multiply x minus 1 in the right side. So now, x times x will give us x to the power 2. X times negative 1 will give us x. And negative 1 times x will give us negative x. And negative 1 multiplying negative 1 will give us positive 1. Now notice here we have like terms. Like terms are the ones with the same what? Exponent. So we have negative x minus what? Negative x. We are going to have negative 2x. So hence we have x to the power 2 minus 2x plus 1. So now, what then do we do? Since we have 2x plus 1 is equals to x to the power 2 minus 2x plus 1. Those with x, we put them together, and those without x or variable, we put them together. So please look at the workings at the bottom. So we have x to the power 2 minus 2x plus 1 is equals to 2x plus 1. Those with x, we put them together. So we are going to have x to the power 2 minus 2x minus 2x. Why minus 2x? Because 2x is moving from the right to the left. Hence we have minus 2x, and then it is equals to 1 minus 1. The other one moved from the left to the right. So therefore we are going to have x to the power 2 minus 4x. Why minus 4x? Because we have like terms. So we are going to have minus 4x is equals to 0. So now we are going to have x to the power 2 minus 4x is equals to 0. Now we take out the common factor. The common factor is what? X. So x in the bracket, x minus 4 is equals to 0. Now we take x is equals to 0, or x is equals to positive 4. Please look at the example 2 and you will see how I got x is equals to 0 or x is equals to positive 4. So now example 4. If we have square root of x minus 1 plus 3 is equals to x. Here learners, before we square both sides, 3 must move to the right hand side, and since it is positive, it will become negative. So therefore, we are going to have x minus 3. Then we can square both sides to do away with the square root. So when we square both sides, we are going to have x minus 1 is equals to x to the power 2 minus 6x plus 9. Why? Because square root of negative 1, square root of x minus 1 to the power 2, the 2 will cancel the root sign, so we will be left with x minus 1. and the x minus 3 in a bracket to the power 2. Please look at the workings. X minus 3 to the power 2 means x minus 3 is multiplying itself. So we are going to have x minus 3, x minus 3. Now the left is multiplying what is inside the right. So we take x will multiply x minus 3, and negative 3 will multiply x minus 3. So x times x will give us x to the power 2, and x times negative 3 will give us negative 3x. Then we take negative 3 will multiply what is inside the bracket at the right. So we are going to have negative 3 times x will give us negative 3x, and negative 3 times negative 9 will give us positive 9. So can you see we have like terms? That is negative 3x minus 3x. And negative 3x minus 3x will give us negative 6. Hence we have x to the power 2 minus 6x plus 9. So therefore the equation now becomes x minus 1 is equals to x to the power 2 minus 6x plus 9. It means the left is equals to the right. Or you can also write whatever we have at the right side must also be equals to whatever we have at the left hand side. Hence, look at the workings. I have changed it. We have x to the power 2 minus 6x plus 9 is equals to x minus 1. Now, those with x, we put them together. So we are going to have x to the power 2 minus 6x. X at the right hand side is coming to the left hand side, so it must change to be negative, which is equals to, now 9 is going to the right, 9 is positive, going to the right must be negative. So hence we have negative 1 minus 9. So like terms, negative 6x minus x will give us minus 7x. Notice there we have negative x. The coefficients of that x is minus 1. So negative 6 minus 1 will give us negative 7. So hence we have x to the power 2 minus 7x is equals to negative 10. So now we have to write this in a standard form. That is the quadratic equation standard form of ax to the power 2 plus bx plus c is equal to 0. So now the negative 10 will move to the left. It will be positive. So we are going to have x to the power 2 minus 7x plus 10 is equals to 0. So at this point, we find two numbers that when we multiply, we must have positive 10. And that same two numbers, when we subtract or add, we have to have negative 7. So now the two numbers are negative 5 and negative 5. Because negative 5 times negative 2 will give us positive 10. And negative 5 minus 2 will give us minus 7. So now we put minus 5 and minus 2 to replace the minus 7. Hence we have x to the power 2 minus 5x minus 2x plus 10 is equal to 0. Now we find a common factor is x in the bracket x minus 5, and the common number is negative 2 in the bracket x minus 5 is equal to 0. The numbers outside the bracket, we put them together, and the one in the bracket, we take only one. Hence we have x minus 2 in the bracket, and again x minus 5 in the bracket or parenthesis is equals to 0. So now we have to look for x. So we take x minus 2 is equals to 0. and x minus 2 is equals to 0. Hence we have x is equals to 2 or x is equals to 5. Now the correct answer that will fit in the equation is x is equals to 2. Now the last example is completing the squares. Sometimes learners, it is not easy to factorize quadratic equation. So if it is not easy, it's either we use completing the squares or using a formula. So now let's talk about completing the squares. If we have x to the power 2 minus 6x minus 11 is equals to 0. The example is already in a standard form, so we do not have to change anything there. Now to solve completing the squares, we have to find the coefficients of what is in the equation, the middle one. And the middle one is what? 6x. And the coefficients of that x is negative 6. So now, to solve this quadratic equation using completing the squares, first you have to move negative 11 to the right hand side. And once you moved, it's going to be positive 11. Second, you have to find half of the coefficient of x. Then after, you square. And half of the coefficient of x, that is half of 6, will give us 3. Then after, you square it. So now, half of negative 6 is negative 3. So now we have to add and subtract negative 3 to the power 2. Then after, we put it in the equation. So hence we have x to the power 2 minus 6x plus 9 minus 9 is equals to 11. I repeat, we find half of the coefficient of x, and the coefficient of x is 6, negative 6. So half of negative 6 is negative 3. Then after getting the negative 3, we find the square of the square of negative 3. So after, we have to add and subtract after we have what? Squared. So when we square 3, we will have 9. And when we square 3, we are going to have 9. Then after, we minus what we have squared. So hence, we are going to have x to the power 2 minus 6x plus 9 minus 9 is equals to 11. So now we have quadratic trinomial in our solution. The quadratic trinomial is x to the power 2 minus 6x plus 9. You remember how we solved example 2? We find two numbers that when we multiply, we are going to have positive 9, and when we add or subtract, we are going to have negative 6. So please look at the workings. The two numbers are negative 3 and negative 3. Negative 3 times negative 3 will give us positive 9. And negative 3 minus 3 will give us negative 6. So now we put the two numbers in the equation. So we are going to have x to the power 2 minus 3x minus 3x plus 9. Now we find a common factor. We are going to have x in a bracket, x minus 3 in a bracket, x minus 3. So those outside the bracket, we put them together and we select 1 of the common factors. So we are going to have x minus 3, or in a bracket x minus 3, which is equals to x in a bracket x minus 3 in a bracket to the power 2, as you can see there. Now the negative 9 will move to the right, it will become positive, and we are going to have 11 plus 9, which is 20. So now what then do we have to do? Now to get x, we need to square both. We need to find the square root of both sides to do away with the square. So the square root of x minus 3 to the power 2 will give us x minus 3, and we are going to have plus or minus square root of 20. So x is equals to square root of 20 plus 3, or x is equals to negative square root of 20 plus 3. Learners, that brings an end to today's lesson. Please look forward for another video still on equations and inequalities. In our next meeting, we will talk about using a formula in solving quadratic equation before we move on to inequalities. And please do not forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Thank you and have a nice day.